Welcome to our in-depth exploration of Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, one of the most influential texts in education, philosophy, and social justice. Published in 1968 during a time of significant political upheaval in Latin America, this book has transcended its context to become a guiding framework for educators, activists, and theorists worldwide. It's more than a critique of traditional education. It's a revolutionary call to action. Freire challenges us to rethink the way we teach and learn, arguing that education is never neutral. It either functions as a tool of oppression, perpetuating existing power structures, or as a practice of freedom, empowering individuals to critically engage with and transform their world. Freire's work compels us to examine the dynamics of power in education, the role of dialogue, and the relationship between reflection and action. This essay will unpack these ideas and explore their enduring relevance. Freire's most famous critique is of the banking model of education. In this model, teachers are seen as the sole bearers of knowledge, while students are treated as passive recipients, empty containers waiting to be filled. Teachers deposit information, and students are expected to store it without question. This process turns education into a one-way transmission, stripping students of their agency and reducing learning to rote memorization. For Freire, this model mirrors the dynamics of oppression. It reinforces hierarchies, with teachers positioned as authority figures and students as subordinates. By discouraging critical thinking, the banking model ensures that students remain passive, accepting the world as it is, rather than questioning or changing it. This is education as domination, a tool to maintain the status quo. But what's the alternative? Freire proposes a radically different approach, problem-posing education. Unlike the banking model, problem-posing education is dialogical and participatory. Teachers and students engage in a collaborative process of inquiry, exploring real-world problems that matter to them. This approach treats students as co-creators of knowledge, capable of critical thinking and self-reflection. The goal is not just to understand the world, but to transform it. Central to Freire's philosophy is the concept of conscientization or critical consciousness. This involves becoming aware of the social, political, and economic forces that shape our lives and recognizing that these forces are not natural or inevitable. They can be challenged and changed. Through critical consciousness, individuals move from a passive acceptance of their circumstances to an active engagement in their own liberation. In problem-posing education, students reflect on their lived experiences, question the structures that oppress them, and imagine alternatives. This process requires dialogue, a mutual exchange of ideas in which everyone's voice matters. For Freire, dialogue is not just a method. It's an act of love and a recognition of our shared humanity. Freire's analysis of oppression is another cornerstone of his work. He argues that society is structured by a dynamic of oppressors and oppressed, a relationship that dehumanizes both groups. The oppressors maintain their power by exploiting and controlling others, while the oppressed are reduced to objects, denied agency and autonomy. A key insight is that the oppressed often internalize the worldview of their oppressors. They may accept their conditions as natural or even aspire to become oppressors themselves. This internalization perpetuates the cycle of domination. Freire insists that true liberation requires breaking this cycle. It's not enough for the oppressed to simply gain power. They must transform the structures of power themselves. Liberation is a collective process, rooted in solidarity and dialogue. It's about creating a society where all people can reclaim their humanity and participate as equals. For Freire, reflection and action, what he calls praxis, are inseparable. Reflection without action is mere intellectualism, and action without reflection is activism without direction. Together, they form the basis of meaningful change. Praxis begins with critical reflection, analyzing the conditions of oppression and understanding their root causes. But reflection alone is not enough. It must be accompanied by action, concrete steps to challenge and transform these conditions. This cyclical process of reflection and action is how individuals and communities become agents of change. Education, in this sense, is never neutral. It's either a tool for liberation or for domination. Freire calls on educators to align their practice with the struggle for justice, recognizing that teaching is always a political act. Dialogue is central to Freire's pedagogy. Unlike monologue, which imposes ideas from above, dialogue is an egalitarian process that values everyone's contributions. It's through dialogue that individuals can critically examine their reality, learn from each other, and co-create solutions. Freire describes dialogue as an act of love, humility, and faith in humanity. It requires openness, mutual respect, and a willingness to learn. Importantly, dialogue is not about imposing one's ideas on others. It's about working together to uncover truths and possibilities. In a world increasingly polarized by authoritarianism, misinformation, and exclusionary ideologies, Freire's emphasis on dialogue feels profoundly relevant. It reminds us that meaningful change begins with listening, understanding, and building bridges. While Pedagogy of the Oppressed has been celebrated for its transformative vision, it's not without its critics. Some argue that Freire's emphasis on dialogue and reflection can overlook the urgency of immediate action, especially in contexts of extreme oppression. Others question the feasibility of his ideas in large-scale education systems dominated by standardized testing and rigid curricula. Additionally, Freire's language and philosophical style can be challenging, particularly for readers unfamiliar with Marxist and existentialist traditions. Critics have also pointed out that his work sometimes assumes a universal experience of oppression, which may not fully account for the intersecting dynamics of race, gender, and other identities. Yet these critiques often serve to deepen engagement with Freire's work. They highlight the need to adapt his ideas to specific contexts and challenges, rather than treating them as a one-size-fits-all solution. Freire's ideas remain as relevant today as they were in the 20th century. In an era of widening inequality, systemic racism, and environmental crises, his call for critical consciousness and collective action resonates deeply. Movements for racial justice, feminist liberation, and decolonial education have drawn on Freire's insights to challenge oppressive systems and imagine new possibilities. Educators around the world continue to implement problem-posing methodologies, fostering critical thinking and empowerment in their classrooms. At the same time, Freire's work challenges us to reflect on the broader purposes of education. In a world increasingly driven by market logic, where education is often reduced to a means of economic advancement, Freire reminds us that education is fundamentally about humanization. It's about nurturing our capacity to think, dream, and act in pursuit of a better world. Pedagogy of the Oppressed is more than a book. It's a call to action. Freire challenges us to reject passive acceptance of the world as it is, and to embrace our potential as co-creators of a more just and humane society. His work compels us to rethink education, not as a tool for compliance, but as a practice of freedom. Through dialogue, critical reflection, and collective action, we can confront oppression in all its forms. Freire's vision is not about offering easy answers. It's about inspiring us to ask better questions, to challenge the systems that dehumanize us, and to imagine new ways of being together. In the spirit of Freire, let us remember that the struggle for liberation is ongoing. It begins with critical consciousness, but it must be sustained through action. Together, we have the power to transform our world, one dialogue, one act of reflection, one step toward justice at a time.